Hello. I said in another video that this chest was another video for another day. And that's kind of a joke because this chest is a whole series of videos as to what would be essential to woodworking. I said that'd be a good topic for a video. What do you need? What can you do without? And I think the way to approach that subject is, for starters, I don't want anyone to think that I'm one of those guys that says you got to have this and you got to have that and you got to have this, and you know, and I'll tell you what would really be honest is most woodworking shows, if they would be honest and say, okay, we're going to show you essential woodworking tools, they'd have to have the camera and go around the shop on foot and say, well, you know, you got to have this table saw with this kind of fence and this kind of bandsaw and this kind of radial arm miter sawing station, and you got to have this dust collector or you'll die, and you know, all this stuff. If they would be honest, you know, they'd have to do this on foot and go around the shop. Here's everything you got to have, and I just detest that. I've come to detest that in our modern thing, that all I see is machines replacing skill. And that's another rant, which I've already done in other videos, so I won't get into that anymore. But I will say this: you can't do everything. So if you say, I need this, it's normally based on a task at hand or a thing you're trying to accomplish. And you know, for the hobby woodworker, what you pick which mountains you want to climb. You pick the projects that are reasonable to your skill level and your tooling and equipment. So, do you want to build everything? Well, then, yeah, you're going to have all kinds of crazy tools. If you want to do everything, you know, you want to do furniture that you chop the tree down and use a wood miser to flitch cut the planks, and then you got to have a kiln drying source or your own kiln drying, or you got to air dry it forever, or then you got to have trailers and bobcats to move the material, and forklifts, and you got to have barns to store it in, and then you got to have 20-inch thickness planes, and you got to have 36-inch drum sander, belt sander thingies, and you got to have all this shit to do this. You know, is that what you want to do? You want to do everything? You know, you got to have everything. You got to have gigantic table saws that you can put a hot dog in and it won't cut a hot dog, and you know, all this stuff. And it's driving me crazy. You have to tell that this is woodworking here. This is what woodworking is, and that's not woodworking. To me, it isn't. So back to the subject at hand, though. What would I say that you need? I can't say anything that you need. I think there's things that you look at the task at hand and you say, this tool becomes essential to that task, and then you approach it from that standpoint and you build up your arsenal of resources. You build up your arsenal of tools. Your tools grow with your skills, and your skills grow with your tools. You can't use a chisel if you don't have a chisel. So you're not going to develop skill with a chisel if you don't have a chisel. But do you have to have a 12-piece set and the finest ones? No. So you got to use some common sense with this stuff, and I see so little common sense anymore. And what I typically see in all the shows is, let's replace the skill with a machine. Here, if we have this machine, we don't need this skill because we got this machine that'll do this. And yeah, there's some skill that you have to acquire to do the machine, and so you got these other layers in there, and it's ridiculous. You know, if that's fun for you, great, go there. You know, but you probably won't see me pushing stuff through machines, because I think it's boring to sit and watch somebody be a machine operator. I want to watch somebody work wood. I don't want to watch them be a machine operator. I don't want to watch them cram stuff through table saws and thickness planes and drum sanders and even router tables, you know, and even band saws. I really don't want to see people cram stuff through those things. If they have to do that, fine. But I don't want to see that. That isn't elevating my level of information. That's just my opinion. But back to the matter at hand. Essential tools. Well, I say facetiously in the title, these are tools, absolute essential tools. Well, I'm doing that tongue-in-cheek. I'm trying to draw somebody in and see that I'm actually tricking them a little bit and saying you really don't need a lot of things. But what to get started, what would you typically want to have? And I think you got to have a pencil. Okay, that's not too hard. Well, there's choices in pencils. So you get some pencils. There's fatter pencils. I don't use these a whole lot. I have them, but I don't use them a lot. I love Ticonderoga number 2s. I just think they're the best pencil made. They're expensive. A 24 pack is like $8, but I think they're good pencils. Kind of a nerdy thing to talk about, but I like a good pencil if I'm going to spend money on pencils. I also love traditional carpenter's pencils. Proper thing with them, and the reason I like them is not just because they don't break so easy, but you sharpen them a set way. You do your 2 flat sides, then you hit your narrow sides, not to a point, but more like a knife edge. You get a very fine mark with these. So they have their place. Up against a square, you can go in as tight as a pencil can be, pencil line. Which brings me to the square. Most skilled woodworkers you're gonna find skilled woodworkers and cabinet makers like a combination square because of its many applications. To me, that's an essential tool. The knife that you've already seen, sharpened pencils, cut open packaging. You can cut materials with it. So many things. It's just kind of a given. You would probably have a utility knife. A lot of your layout and marking can be done, and I've done it, especially in carpentry, with a utility knife. Thousands and thousands of times I've marked stuff with a utility knife. As you get more into woodwork, I think a finer knife, this is what I'm currently using. This is what I traditionally like. I've come to like this. I wouldn't say I always use this, but I've had these for a long time and never thought of it as a woodworking knife, and kind of rediscovered it through Paul Seller's channel. What a great marking knife it is. And I love it to throw in the toolbox. It locks, it folds and locks. Great knife. At the bench I'm trying this fixed knife. It's called a tomato knife, but it's a good layout and marking knife, and I like it a lot, and just keep resharpening it, and I love it. Another knife I'm using more and more is I like breakaway knives. I always did like them, but I worry about a little thin one breaking on me and the danger of it and everything, but I've not found that to be the case. And this is a DeWalt that I'm using. It's heavy, it's economical. I like the breakaway blades, and so there's places I can get way inside of something and mark, and I like the tool. So is that essential? No. Are both of these essential? No. You know, I'd get this. If you could only have one, I'd have a utility knife, but I'd get one of these Stanley 10-49, 049. They're great knives. I would get a bevel, sliding bevel of some type. I've just updated some of my stuff so it looks new, and it is new to me. It's new, period. But it's because I had so many old things. I'm sort of streamlining and boiling down, probably for the rest of my life now, and I'm putting some money into new layout tools. And this is a new Empire I got, and I like it because it fastens down pretty tight. They all move a little bit, but this style is about as sturdy as you're going to get, and very reasonably priced. And I think it's a good tool, good value, and I think it's a necessary tool, certainly for me. Here's a protractor. This is a little general. These are good tools, and setting and finding angles, I think these are pretty much essential. And then a wing divider. I like the style that is all metal. You can lock it really solid and it doesn't move, and it's got a spot to put a pencil in, so it becomes a great compass. I think that is a really valuable tool to have. A lot of these are at the bench all the time. They're so needful to me. They're actually out all the time on the bench. A few of these are not. These typically would not be out all the time. They go back in the drawer. Another tool that's kind of essential to me, you can make it yourself. I have a video on making a cutting gauge. I think that that is vital. If you were going to buy one, if you were going to go on Amazon or somewhere, this is a Crown Tools. It's made in England. This has brass inserts. It's a mortise gauge on one side and a regular pin style marking gauge on the other. Really a good, useful tool for a cabinet maker and furniture maker. I think, you know, woodworker. I think you could say that's a necessary tool. And if you're going to do a store-bought version, that's a good one to have, and really pretty reasonable. I think it's $30 to $35. I like a ruler. It's out all the time. 12-inch, really accurate, good ruler. I use the square a lot when I can, but I don't like taking it apart just to get a ruler. So I like having a 12-inch steel ruler. I like the ones that start right at the 0. I don't like excess on them. Some of them have excess on one end, and that's okay. You can hang it up, and then the other starts at the line. But I don't like some of the rules that have excess running off each end. I don't know why you would want that in woodworking, or ever really. But this is a Starrett. It's a model 304. It's a classic Starrett rule with Imperial on all the edges, and some of them go down to 64ths. Last time I checked, these are $35, and I like these a lot. I have 2 of them, and one of them's out all the time. I like a stick rule. I'm getting too old to change, and I always did like a stick rule. And before, I actually worked with guys that never had these. Growing up, this is all they had, was a stick rule. And even in their elderly years, sometimes they kind of have fun with you and give you a measurement 6 foot and 42 inches, because that's how they used to do measurements. They didn't have these. That's hard to imagine. They had fiberglass and steel tapes, big long ones. They didn't carry around tapes in their apron very much. Not until, you know, especially into the 60s and into the 70s. Now obviously in my time, when I started out in '82, these were already popular, and they're essential for measurements. But I like a stick rule. I grew up using one and trained with people that used them, and I'm too old to change now. And I like this Milwaukee is a high strength plastic. Yes, it says it's made in Switzerland, and it seems to be very well made. I use different tapes all the time, but the key with tapes is get them to match. I keep one in my truck. I have dozens and dozens of tapes, but the one that I have in my truck, if I'm measuring a job and then come back, it has to agree with the one in the shop, vice versa. So I think that's a big thing with your tapes. If you have more than one tape, make sure they agree, because it's easy for them not to agree. They get beat up and the ends get tore up, and then before long they're not the same measurements. And I think that's vital. Same thing with squares. Out all the time, I have another little combo square. I like having the little one for joinery and laying out little things with mortises and tenons and that kind of thing, and checking the squareness of the edge of a board. If I'm hand planing a board, I want to check it. To me, it's kind of second nature. I want this square, but the more squares you have to think about, it's hard enough to get a square, but on top of that, what I look for in squares is I want them all to agree. And so I've taken the trouble to go through and make all my squares agree with each other, and if there's a bad apple, I might throw it out, because not much you can do with these squares. These combo squares, there is a YouTube out there that shows you a little bit of tuning that you can do and maybe get these right on the money. You know, and you can test a square, you put it on the edge of something very straight, and mark it, and then flip it over and mark it, and there's your variance, and you kind of see what you're up against. But there is a few little things you can do to tune these and improve on them if there's minor inaccuracy. And then from there, you know, I think it's important that you check that all your squares agree with each other. Try to make them agree. Try to you know, keep going through tools until you get good agreement on your tools. You know, it might take you a while. You know, I can't necessarily throw something out and then buy a new one right away, but at least know about the error, and you can work around it. A tool not out, it is out, but it's not on the bench all the time, is a good framing square is really important to me. You know, it's kind of in keeping with a stubborn carpenter's mentality. I love a speedy square. I like the protractor aspect of it. I like the no moving parts. I like it as a tri-square. And I like these empires because they're laser etched. I can read them really well. And I just think it's a well-made tool. The saddle is as big as any of them I've ever used. So you almost have a saddle square to go down two sides. And I just like the way I can read it because of the etching, the laser etching. Their framing square is the same way. And it's really a good square. And again, it agrees. My squares agree with each other. And I've just found, had good luck with the Empire brand. I like what they are for the money. And framing, I like a traditional framing square. The Empire has some other little charts on it that are useful to me, probably more than roof rafters at this stage of my life, but I do like rafter tables and all that. But basically I like a square, a large square like this for layout, and that's kind of my 2-foot straight edge, and a lot of uses, and I just think it's a vital carpentry and woodworking tool. It's probably common sense to a lot of people, but some people wouldn't think of having this in their wood shop. Incidentally, a high quality square has the little notch in the corner. A lot of people don't know what that's for. If the square gets out of square, because what will happen, you go on a roof and drop it, it lands on the slab the wrong way and it bends. You know, you drop them on the floor and you'll bend the square and they'll get a hair out. And you can check them, the way I was saying earlier, on a straight table edge or something, and then flip it over, sheet of plywood. And if there's variance, you got a problem. Well, this little notch, traditionally that was there to help fix that. You could take the square, drive a nail set out at this far corner, and that would expand, put tension in the metal and expand it and close the square in a little. If you drove the nail set nearer to this corner, it would expand the metal and open the square. And you could actually adjust the square back into 90 if it got out. And have I done that? You bet I have. Steel squares are bad for that because they're so heavy, and if you do drop them, they are prone to knocking themselves out of square. Aluminum too, but they're not as heavy. And I think it's important to be careful with a square and not drop it and bang it up. I think that these kinds of tools are something you want to be especially careful with. That's why I like speed squares in a lot of scenarios. Out in the field and carpentry scenarios, these can take a real beating and still be square. So in terms of essentials for layout and marking, that's about it. There's other things, many other things in the case that we can talk about, and you know, perhaps we should talk about them. One thing I have out, and it doesn't sit out all the time, but I think get yourself a set of cheap French curves. I think they really saved me a lot of trouble in establishing a smooth curve. They're based on classical shapes, so you know there's great historical precedent for these shapes and these cyma curves and the various things there are go back, I don't know how far back they go, to the Renaissance maybe, but I think for the average Joe to have a couple dollars in a set of French curves, you know, I don't know what they cost, probably not $10. I don't know, but I've had these a long time and they sure do come in handy. But they don't sit out all the time. There's other things you can talk about, but really nothing that I would say is utterly do or die essential. I do like a yardstick, another thing that sits over here all the time on a hook. I like a metal one so I don't break it, but you could use a wood one. But I like that straight edge aspect of it. I like that this has metric on one side and imperial on the other. So that comes in handy a lot, and I use it an awful lot. And you might want a longer one. Instead of a 3-footer, you might want a 48-inch or a 72-inch if you could only own one. You know, I have a 3-foot and I have a 6-foot back there that I use a lot, and then I have drywall T-squares, you know, drywall squares, which are 48, so I use those a lot, and so I kind of got my bases covered. But yeah, those are a few things that I think we might call essential. I hate, like I say, I hate to use that word. I hate to say you need this. You have to decide what you need, and don't let anybody pressure you into making you think you need something if you know you don't need it. And if you can do without something, chances are you're better off if you can do without it. I'm just telling you that from experience. And I say that from the standpoint of most of the things I ran out and bought, I really didn't need. And I'd like to have the money back now and have what I really need and no more. Thanks for watching.